Hello and welcome back to the TapD demo series. I'm Hannah with Lightning Labs, and this is a series of short demo videos walking through using the Taproot Assets daemon, TapD, from install to mint to send to burn. And at this point in the series, we've minted some assets and we've transferred some assets using the CLI, and now it's time to transfer some assets using the API. Specifically here, we'll be using, making use of TapD's REST API via some Python scripts. So let's talk about that briefly. If you are planning on working with the API, you'll want to be very familiar with this website. These are the API docs at lightning.engineering/API-docs/API/taproot-assets. And here you can find all the information on all the API calls. And you can do we have both gRPC and REST available. And of course, you can use the command line, the CLI, if you'd like. But here in the docs, you have examples for gRPC and REST in both JavaScript and Python. In this series, we are making use of the REST API via some Python scripts. And all of the scripts that I'm using in this demo series, I have dumped into a GitHub repo here. So if you'd like to pull these down and try them for yourself, all there for you. But I've just mostly copied and pasted right out of the API docs. So if you're going to make use of the API, definitely get familiar with these docs. Okay, cool. Let's go back over to our scripts, and there's a couple of things we want to note here before we dive right into it. So in our example, we've got an Alice node and a Bob node, and the Alice node has minted a couple different types of assets, one called API demo bucks, and that's what Alice will be sending to Bob here. But in a previous demo video, we talked a bit about universes, and it's important to note that for this transfer to happen between Alice and Bob, Alice will already have all of the information about the asset because she minted them, right? Her TapD node minted them. But the Bob TapD node, that node needs to be aware of this asset and the various information surrounding it, right? The Genesis transaction, proof data, etc. So in this particular case, we've set it up so both Alice and Bob, their universes are in each other's federation. So they're talking with one another, but it could work differently. They could both be talking to the same public universe or something of that variety. But it's just important to note that in order for this asset to be transferred from Alice to Bob, Bob needs to have the data on the asset. And so his universe has to go about collecting that in some fashion. Okay, so I think we've got all of the prerequisites out of the way, and we can start diving into these scripts. So I'll note here how I'm connecting to these nodes, right? We have an Alice node and we have a Bob node, and here's our connection info that we need to talk to these nodes. So I am running these scripts here on my local computer, and both the Alice node and the Bob node are Ubuntu servers that are out on the interwebs, right? So here, first we're going to start off by connecting to Bob. So this is the IP address, and this is the REST API port. So you have to make sure that that port is open and available for communication. Check your firewalls. I also went into the tapd config file and made sure that the tapd was accepting incoming connections on this port. All right. I also have on my local machine copies of the admin macaroon files and TLS certs, and that gives me the permission that I need and the ability to communicate with both of these nodes. And I'm using just this very simplistic demo way to communicate with either the Bob node or the Alice node. And right now we're set up to connect to the Bob node. So let's go here and look at this first script just to list the assets that a node currently has. Let me clear this. And I won't dive too much into this because we've covered it in previous videos, and it's coming straight out of the API docs, but this is a Python script. We're doing standard Python stuff. We're pulling in Python libraries for these REST calls. This is where we import that connection information. Here's the part that really changes from script to script. That's the endpoint that we're hitting. On this one, it's the taproot-assets/assets. And we're, formatting our macaroon, adding it to the header. For this particular script, we don't need to give it any data. We're just asking it to send us back information on assets. So we're making a GET request, and then down here we have Python error handling stuff. All right, cool. So I think we're ready to give this a try. We will run this and see what we get back. Awesome. That is what we are expecting. Bob currently has 0 assets, and now we will attempt to change that. So let's go to this script, the new address script. Awesome. Again, the vast majority of the stuff is the same. We're just going to have a look at the different endpoint that we're hitting here, this addresses endpoint, that abbreviation there, ADDRS. And we're making a post request, and now we do have to give this node some information. So we're talking to Bob's node. At this point, Bob's node is already aware of the API demo box that it wants to receive. So Bob's node has all kinds of information on this asset, and now we're going to ask Bob's node to create an address. Won't dive into detail on what exactly is in that address, but basically Bob's going to take all this information on this asset that he's aware of and pull out some important bits and format it such that he can send it over to Alice, so Alice knows exactly how to construct an on-chain transaction to transfer him some of those assets. All right. So here is the most important bit of data we need for this particular script, and that is the asset ID. So we're assuming that Bob is somehow already aware of which particular asset he is interested in receiving and has that ID, as well as all the universe info he needs. And then we have to give it an amount. And these are the 2 required fields here. There are many more that you could use, but for simplicity here, we're going to just show you the required ones, and that's the asset ID and the amount. And that's all we need here. Let's clear this out, and we'll run it, and hopefully in return, we get that address. So let's give it a try. Cool. So that works, and here's all kinds of information it returned to us, and it's not very human readable, but this is the data we're looking for. This is the address which Bob will have to send over to Alice so that she can transfer him those 10 API demo bucks. So we want to grab that information. We'll note here that somehow this address needs to get from Bob's TapD node over to Alice's TapD node, and that's something that I imagine happens sort of at that application level. But we have this information, so let's clear this out now that I've copied that. And then we can go over to the send assets script. But important to note here is that Bob generates the address, and then Alice receives that address. And then Alice has to instruct her TapD node to then construct that on-chain transaction and send those assets to Bob. So in order to talk to Alice's TapD node, we're going to come back over here. In our very simplistic fashion, we're going to start talking to the Alice node and stop talking to the Bob node. Cool. So let's come back to our send asset script. Again, most things here are the same. Just note the changed endpoint. Now we're hitting the send endpoint, and we're making a post request, and we just need to paste in this address right here. Cool. I'm going to save this. Awesome. And then we'll run it, and we'll see what happens. Again, we're now talking to the Alice node, and we've given Alice the information she needs to be able to construct an on-chain transaction to transfer some funds to Bob. So we'll ask that node to do that and see what happens. Awesome. That is what we are looking for. Again, not very pretty and nice to read, but we can see we get a whole bunch of information back. Here is the proof data here. There's our amount, 10. We won't dig too much into this. You can go into the API docs and get very specific information on exactly what data is returned from here. But it looks like we also have, some transaction IDs. Oh, look at fee info, all kinds of different stuff. But this is good. That we got this in return means that that was successful. That on-chain transaction has happened, transferring those 10 API demo bucks from Alice to Bob. So now we'll want to head back over to connecting to the Bob node and run that list command again, just to be really sure that everything worked as we expect, and Bob is now the proud owner of 10 API demo bucks. So let's go back to our settings file. Again, we're going to comment that out, uncomment this, save it, and come back to our list script. It's important to note here that Bob's TapD node is probably not going to instantaneously update its balance info. It's going to want to make sure that that transaction actually happened and is confirmed on chain, and that it's received proof data. So you might want to wait for a confirmation before you try running this script to ask the Bob node if it's received those assets. So we'll just do that here, and we'll run this after there's been a confirmation on chain. All right, now we've got some on-chain confirmation. Let's run this script and see what we get. Awesome. That looks like what we want to see. Let's have a little bit of a closer look. We can see we've got all kinds of different information in here. Cool. We've got the name, API demo bucks. We can see our amount, 10, etc. Awesome. So that worked. We successfully transferred some assets from Alice to Bob using the API. As always, check out the docs at docs.lightning.engineering for more information, and I'll see you next time.